start all things in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Hail Mary,
full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
I'll have to turn this on. Can you hear me? Go. Okay, so welcome back. The third night. So the first night, as you know, we talked about it. We talked about the mess and the disorder that we found within ourselves. And then last week we talked about the root of that mess. So we don't know ourselves. So that which we do, we found out was different from our being, from who we are. If we mix those up, bad things can come of it. This week I want to speak along those same lines, but I want to talk a little bit more practically, which I'm sure you'll welcome a lot. But first we'll start in Italy, in a town called Norcia. This is where the great Saint Benedict was born in 480. Some of you are shaking your heads. If you're a historian, if you know anything about history, 480 should ring a bell. This is right around the time when the Roman Empire was falling. So the great Roman Empire, 1,000-year empire about, and it's crumbling right at this time. So Benedict leaves his home, and he goes to the big city of Rome, of all places, the big city of Rome. And what does he find? Chaos. Barbarians are attacking the city. There's moral depravity. Politicians are stealing money, making themselves much richer than the people. In the centuries past, there were hundreds of days worth of games at the Colosseum. Sexual immorality, food, drink, divorce, you name it. So the appetite for the ungodly was big. So what did he do? He fled to the hills, into a cave near Subiaco. You may have heard of it. You can still visit it to this day. And he lived as a hermit for 3 years in complete silence. Sounds great, huh? Yeah. He immersed himself in silence. And what was the fruit of this silence? He's entitled the father of Western monasticism. And he went on to build 12 different monasteries. So what's the moral of this story? St. Benedict's environment was not conducive to meeting God, so he changed it. And he's not the only one. Our faith, because Catholicism, is filled with great saints who did just that. Even before Benedict, there were what's called the Desert Fathers or the Desert Mothers, mostly in North Africa and the Middle East. These men and women would retreat into the desert. They would retreat from the world. Now we must stop. Were they actually retreating? Were they waving their white flags in surrender to the world? Saying the world was too much, they couldn't handle it? Did they sell out? Were they really fleeing or escaping? No, not really. So many of them in their writings say they went to do two things. They went to battle, and they went to encounter the living God, and that's what we'll talk about tonight. Remember, Christ himself went into the desert, not to get away from temptation, but to face it head on. And it's only because the Spirit led him there that he went. So what does this have to do with quarantine? Well, quarantine turned our noisy world into millions of caves, into millions of makeshift deserts overnight, right? We went from the hustle and bustle, from work, from seeing grandkids, to bringing our kids to dance, to sports, to different events, you name it, to our own Subiaco, to our own Egyptian wasteland. Although it wasn't by our choice like the saints, but we still got it. And in fact, I think out of all the disorders that we talked about the first week, I think this one is the easiest to see the grace of God working. Why? Because he allowed the desert to come to us. He brought the cave to us. So he delivered on a silver platter what we wouldn't seek out ourselves, right? God was tired of the noise. So if you picture a teenager in his room, the door shut, the computer plugged into the wall, probably headphones plugged into the computer, then you see the dad going out with the tree clippers, and he just cuts the electrical wires leading to the house. The dad wants his son back. He wants his eyes free, and he wants his ears open. So God may not have been meeting us in our previous environment. So what did he do? He changed it. Or at least he allowed it to be changed. That's probably a better way of looking at this. Because we're often that teenage boy or girl. We live in noise, plain and simple. So everyone is selling something, right? Everyone's fighting for our attention, and we pay big bucks for these things. Think of all the devices we buy. Spend a lot of money just to distract us, to give us noise, whether that be digital noise, sound, different reminders, you name it. What always fills the void, though, is silence. Silence is always there when everything else is stripped away. But what if we're not used to it? So silence can be scary. If you remember dating, or if you're dating right now, one of the big no-nos is any 2 seconds of silence at a date when you're meeting somebody. You avoid it at all costs, right? Now restaurants provide the little TVs on the table so you don't even have to worry about that. I hate that, by the way. So any void we find in our day, we immediately fill it with mindless scrolling or just searching out something else to fill the void. Prayer is the opposite. So instead of looking down at our device, prayer is the raising of the mind to God. It's giving back to God what rightfully belongs to God. Ourselves, our minds, our hearts. But unfortunately, our initial reaction to silence, like I said, is to run, to flee. If only we knew what we could find in silence, or rather who we could find. Because silence is not just the absence of external noise or just the absence of busy activity. It's not a negative, in other words. Silence can be a positive. The positive presence of God. God's presence. Because God won't be found in loud concerts or alarms or frantic activity, but in stillness, peace, calm, and silence. Silence is the language of God. And what is this language that God himself, God made man, use? What did he use? He said, I am meek and humble of heart. This is the language he used. So silence is where we encounter this heart. The quarantine period was, and it still is, I'm convinced of this, an invitation to silence. But does that always mean it's easy to cultivate? No, of course not. Of course not. So just as the great monks and the great saints went into the desert to battle and to encounter the living God, silence is precisely the meeting point between these two. So silence is where we battle, and silence is where we encounter the living God. First, how prayer is a battle. So wouldn't it be nice if we could just sit down and then immediately we were just raptured in ecstasy, right? So we could just behold the face of God immediately. Well, that would be heaven, right? But we're still on earth, and we know this well. For many reasons, this is not the case. Prayer is a battle. And this is actually a good thing. So through prayer, we're trained, we're formed in order to have the capacity for God and to build a capacity for what he wants to grant us. Okay? So the battle of prayer trains us as sorry soldiers to meet the great general. And then to get his marching orders, but also to encounter his heart. And the Catechism echoes this. I love this. The Catechism can often be, use a lot of flowery language or whatnot, but I think it nails it. So in section 2725, for those of you who are taking notes, it's entitled The Battle of Prayer. The Battle of Prayer. And certainly it is. So let's go through some of these battles. So in prayer, we battle ourselves. Silence introduces us to ourselves. We're with ourselves all day long. There's never been a day when you have not been with yourself, right? But we rarely meet ourselves, actually meet ourselves. There's nothing like sitting by yourself, with nothing else going on. I encourage it. Try it. If you find it difficult, join the club. But that may mean that something's not right. It's a good litmus test. So silence is not an escape from a reality, but it's a deepening into it, to actually what is. Second, we have prayer as a false idea or a false intention. We battle these things, and there's a lot under this. So we can treat prayer as a project. My spiritual director back at St. Ben's always told me, stop treating prayer as a project. I'm going in to do this, this, and this is what I expect to get out of it. And what do you think? If I pray just hard enough, if I do it hard enough, I'll get what I want, right? Prayer is not always about just getting an answer, but ordering our priorities to accept whatever answer is going to be given to us regardless. We also mistake the tools for the actual things, and then we exalt God over them. This has a lot to do with superstition. We're still under section B. What do I mean by this? So we can fixate on the external things of prayer a lot of times. And, okay, I said I wasn't going to pick on anybody, but I'll pick on my dad. So my dad, one of the best men I know, says a rosary probably every day. And I would be in the truck with him, and we'd say a rosary, and then he'd be going through the beads, and he'd say, hey, do you know what Mama's cooking for dinner tonight? Like, I know that. I don't know. And, try to, back to the mystery. What's the mystery? And then a little while later, he'd, nudge me again. Like, his mind was somewhere else. But in his mind, and I asked permission to tell the story, by the way. In his mind, as long as he went through his rosary, as long as he got it done, he was a good Catholic, and he did it right, right? This is what I call the checklist. So you treat the means of prayer as an end in itself, rather than a pathway to get to union with God, right? As long as I did it, as long as I went through my prayer cards, I'm good. We have to go deeper. Next, we have false images of God. This is super important. I wish we had more time to talk about this. Usually they're dead wrong, and they usually come from our parents or other people that we're really close to. So, this is a big word. We anthropomorphize God. So we make God a human, and we project our human ideas from the people we meet onto God. So God might be my genie. He might be my vending machine. If I just put in the right coinage, I'll get what I want out of him. He might be this loaded grandfather in the sky that's just there to make me happy all the time, right? God is not your grandfather, because what do grandparents do? They just want to make their grandkids happy, and then they can pass them on to the real parents, right? God is our father, not our grandfather. Next, we battle distractions. This is a big one. So there are no getting around distractions. They'll come. They will. If we could see them more as opportunities, though, and not obstacles, this could really change our prayer life. So I was at a retreat at LSU one time, and there was a nun there. And I remember she was sharing with us how when she first entered the convent, it was so difficult to get rid of the distractions. She would start her rosary, and her mind just went in 1,000 different directions. But I think it was the Mother Superior who told her that when we start something like the rosary, we say a big yes. Like, yes, I will meditate on these mysteries. But every time our attention is fixed to something else, we have the opportunity to say 1,000 more yeses to bring our attention right back to the center on what we originally decided to do. So instead of saying one big yes, you can say one big yes along with 1,000 others. So kind of to reorient your understanding of distractions. They will come, but don't let it derail you. Okay? And of course we battle noise. This is what we talked about. But we also battle evil forces in our prayer, whether you realize it or not. Discouragement, desolation. When you're just void of the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, and you're just blah. This leads into achadia. So not acadiana like we were talking about, but achadia. This is sadness at the things of God. So in the monastery, when the bell rings and it's time for prayer again, this is when the monk drags his feet with his head down because he doesn't feel like going to prayer. He's sad at the things of God. It's Sunday for us. The church bells are ringing. You know you need to go to church, but you just don't feel like it. You'd rather be doing anything else but the things of God. So if you want to close your eyes, I kind of made a few different, taking all of this, because there are plenty of more battles that we face. I'm going to run through different prayers. So people who pray, who put on different masks, and see if it's you, and we'll discuss them later. So first we have the actor. The actor enters prayer not as himself, but as an idea of what prayer should be. He leaves his true self at the door and enters the chapel with a mask. His prayer sounds more like a Shakespeare monologue than one-on-one communication. The actor feels the need to perform either for his God or for those around him. He's constantly looking and comparing himself to others rather than looking at God. The actor either only prays when people are watching, or if he does pray in private, he's almost unrecognizable to God. Next we have the worrier. The worrier is more concerned with getting the rituals and using the tools of prayer just right than actually sharing his heart. He or she sees God as a taskmaster and a slave handler rather than a father. The warrior's God is not a divine coach who trains his child in love, but a stingy scorekeeper who takes note of every mistake. This person re-says the same Hail Mary 5 times during the rosary before moving on, because the first 4 were muddled with distractions, so they shouldn't have counted. Surely not. The worrier assumes he has lost favor with God since his prayer has been rather dry lately. He has been told that God loves him, that he's a good father who's always listening, and he believes it as long as he doesn't sin, or as long as he doesn't miss his rosary or his devotionals. Only then will nothing bad happen to his family. In all reality, the worrier isn't a joyful servant, but a slave. Next we have the excuse maker. The excuse maker always thinks that the best time to pray is any time but now. He has a perpetual snooze button, and he pushes it any time an opportunity to pray is presented. He's either too tired, the chapel's too far away, or the TV show is just too good to pass up. The excuse maker tells himself that he'll get to praying, knowing good and well that he won't. When the excuse maker remembers that he said his rosary 2 weeks ago, he runs with it and rationalizes that he doesn't want to overdo things. That's just good enough. 2 more. Next we have the calculator. This prayer views the all-powerful, all-knowing, ever-present God of the universe as nothing more than a math equation to be manipulated or a businessman to negotiate with. The calculator thinks that as long as he stays in God's good graces and does just the right things at just the right time for just the right amount of time, anything he wants is in his grasp. He thinks that since he went through all this trouble, the least God could do is grant his wish. The calculator ends every prayer with lip service to God, stating that in the end, his will be done. But in reality, the calculator feels entitled to whatever he or she is asking for. In reality, the calculator's God is nothing more than a pagan God. And this is the last one, the crisis prayer. This prayer comes around at once every blue moon, or at least when the going gets tough. The crisis prayer is not interested in a relationship, but getting a quick fix. So one must give the crisis prayer some credit, though. Unlike many, he or she at least realizes his or her limitations. Like the calculator, the crisis prayer thinks he or she is doing God a favor by coming to him with their problems. Oh, how religious I am, he says to himself. He thinks that God grades on a bell curve. And as long as he's on the above average portion, at least he's doing better than the worst. He's doing just fine. After all, real prayer is just for the monks and the nuns. Okay. So remember that, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. Now, I know what you're saying. Alex, you're the seminarian. You never had to battle in prayer. You know, we're on the front lines, and you're with the general, right? You're just having a nice meal with the general. I'd like to tell you my short version of my personal story and how I certainly did have to battle with prayer. So as a child, prayer was simple and easy. I knew I had a loving Father in heaven, and I talked to him often. It was very simple. But as I got older, I started to do more, I enjoyed the Christian life. I really did. I got fulfillment from living a Christian life. So just like last week, action over doing, or action over being. That's what I was doing. And I thought I was exempt. I thought I could live a good Christian life without really, really praying. Like I've been saying, I thought it was for the monks and the nuns. And I would go to, so in Franklin we have a perpetual adoration chapel, and I'd take my dad's holy hour sometimes if he was at work or whatever. And how would I go? Like this. I'd have a Bible with another spiritual reading, maybe 2 spiritual reading books. I'd have my rosary, my devotional books, and I'd walk in like this with like a stack this high, right? Because God forbid I run out of things to do. Right? God forbid. I remember I went to a little youth camp at the seminary at St. Ben's. And the seminarians would talk about seminary life, and they'd tell us how they did a holy hour every day. Every day? What? Every day? There's no way. And I've been thinking about the seminary since I was a little boy, so I was like, crap. Like, what am I going to do? I can't do this. But when I got to LSU, I decided I'm going to do 30 minutes of prayer every day. And I would plop myself in one of the seats in the chapel. And this is what my prayer was like. I had one foot in the chapel and one foot out the door, right? I couldn't stay still. I would bring my books and my beads like I did in Franklin. God forbid I run out of things to do. And it was like throwing things at the wall, hoping something would stick, right? I'm just going to throw everything at you and hope something just stays on the wall. I was bored. I would look at the tabernacle and I was waiting for something to happen, like entertain me, Lord. And I hated silence. So I associated and I judged my prayer with feeling and not fruits. If I didn't levitate, or if I didn't have this amazing experience, I thought something was wrong. I wasn't doing it right. So prayer was a concession stand, and it was a transaction. It wasn't a relationship. So what changed? Well, a lot changed. So I started making space for God in silence. I was committed, I was consistent, and I surrendered myself to feelings. And I enveloped myself in silence. And I could talk about this for days. But I remember that it was either the first or second week of seminary. And I went early in the morning and I was doing my holy hour. Still dark, it was hot and muggy, it was August. And I was kneeling in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And maybe 5 to 10 minutes in just like a fog light, just my mind just blew open. I've never been the same since. My eyes were open. It was one of those amazing religious experiences. And I realized I don't go to the chapel for an obligation or just to get something, but I go to see a person. And I continue to see that person every day since that day. Man, I could talk about this for days. I love to pray now. Which, the fact that I can say that confidently, and the fact that the type of prayer that I love is a testament to the sheer grace of God. I wish we had more time to go into that. But when I had that epiphany moment, it didn't just change my holy hour, or when I decided to see God, but it changed my whole life. The Lord doesn't want to be Lord over our holy hour, but over our whole lives. So the person I met that day taught me to love silence, and he invited me to what's called the contemplative life. I'm afraid for most Catholics, our prayer lives, or we're good repeaters, right? We know our prayers and we can repeat them really well. I know I certainly did. But I want to set the record straight. I said it before and I'll say it again. To pray well, you do not have to pray like the monks and the nuns. Many times the monks and the nuns don't pray like the monks and the nuns. And this is what it boils down to. Misconceptions within ourselves. I'm not good enough. I'm not trained. I don't know the techniques and the methods. It usually boils down to that. I don't know what to do. Once again, this goes back to our talk last week. So let's finally get into prayer as an encounter with God. So Thomas Aquinas talks about 2 acts of the will. So we go after the good, we seek after it. This is basically what we talked about the first week. We're good about going after our desires, to try to be happy, to try to whatever we talked about the first week. We're not really good at the second one, though. So what do we do when we're in possession of that good? Do we know how to rest in it? What happens when we actually have what we want? If you're in a desert and you want a raspberry cake above all things and you finally get it, the last thing you're going to do is throw it away to look for another one. You're going to savor it. You're going to savor that cake. The prayer of silence or the prayer of contemplation is how we savor God. And I have this handy chart to kind of show like the progression of prayer. So first we start with ready-made prayers. This is what you learned as a child. Our Father, glory be, Hail Mary. These are excellent. Many of them were given to us by God Himself. They're vocal prayers. They're good for groups. They're good when we don't know what to say, when we're in a rage or we're filled with emotion. So you just say the prayer and you know it. But it can often shield us from going deeper. So next we have talking at God. This is like the little grandchild who just talks at his grandparent. The grandparent can't get a word in, but the grandparent just listens anyway. There's no dialogue. Many people never get past talking at God. So let's go deeper. Next we have talking with God. So this is a more mature person's conversation with God. This is like meditation. This is rubbing together the things of our own life with the things of God. It's like Lectio Divina. It's the Rosary. You're thinking about the mysteries of God. Like Peter on the water. You're asking, what was it like, Peter? Jesus, what was it like for you? What was His face like? And there's a back and forth. You're talking with God. Then you're listening to God. This is when we shut up, finally, and we let God speak to us. This is like the grandchild who's older, who's having trouble with his marriage or whatever, and he goes to the grandparent and asks for his wise advice. So finally the child is ready to listen and not say anything. And then finally, and this is what Christ taught me on that morning, is being with God. Being with God. This is the prayer of contemplation, the prayer of silence. This is union with God Himself, and not just like a ping pong ball thinking about the things of God. This is God Himself. So, St. Teresa of Avila says, this is taking time frequently to be alone with the one we know loves us. So God is big and mysterious, and we can often equate Him with things like an image, like a rosary, like words on a page. But is that God? Is that actually God? No, we talked about this earlier. It's a means to God. It's a pathway to God. God is big and mysterious. So contemplation is just resting in the darkness. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to have a theology degree in who God is. You're just resting in Him. So one of my favorite scenes from Everybody Loves Raymond. Have you watched it? Yeah. Okay. It's when Marie is sitting with Frank at the kitchen table, and they always bicker. There's a battle between them two, but I'll use it for encounter. And it's early in the morning, and Frank drinks all his orange juice or something like that, and without skipping a beat, Marie takes the orange juice and pours some more, and then butters his toast because she knows he likes butter on his toast, and she knows exactly how much. And then Frank passes her the jam because he knows that she likes strawberry jam on her toast. And they're not saying anything. They're not even looking at each other. But simply being with each other is enough. And they know each other's movements like the back of their hand. Or it's like the couple on the porch. They're just rocking with each other. They don't have to look at each other. They don't even have to touch hands. The fact that he knows that she's there and the fact that she knows that he's there is enough. So a professor in my university says, don't be a tourist in the land of God. That's what we're talking about. As a tourist, you go here, you get your picture, and then you're done. The contemplative find something worthy of their time, and then they take a seat, and they just rest in it. They don't have to figure it out. They just take the rocking chair, because they know exactly where it is, and they can just go right back to that place. So it's being with the one who is, is always worth it. The one who is, God himself, who is being itself, is always worth it. So anytime you enter into this type of prayer, it's valuable in itself. You don't have to worry about, did I get anything out of it? Did I do it right? Did I whatever? Simply being with God is enough. It's an end in and of itself. And there are certain, and we never, it's good for its own sake, yes, but there are certain effects. So one is you cultivate awareness. So after I met this person in the chapel, I could go to Walmart in Covington and there was just this abiding presence of God as I was looking for the flaws. I'm serious. So this abiding awareness with God allows God to be as big as he actually is. So he can be encountered whenever he desires, wherever he desires, whenever you desire. Because he's always there, and you always know he's there, and you know he's always there everywhere. So St. Paul says, pray without ceasing, right? But we can't pray at all times. It's kind of what I'm talking about with this awareness. We can't pray at all times if we're not praying at specific times. So when we make this space with silence, there's an abiding internal presence within us, no matter what the external noise is. There's a second thing. There's a gaze of the contemplative. So when you spend time with Christ, you get the vision of Christ. You start to see the world as he sees it. It's not simply the eyes of faith, although it's very similar. But it's the gaze of the contemplative. So instead of rushing to work, you slow down. And you start to actually see that tree that you never knew you parked in front of. You start to yearn for wide open spaces just to sit down and look at God's creation. I started doing this at the seminary. We just spent hours in the woods. Just because. I didn't have to bring a resume back to show what I did. It was because he was there and I knew he was there and I wanted to be there with him. That was enough. And then finally, it restores a sense of wonder. So children have a beautiful sense of wonder. Everything's new for them. Everything. When you meet God in this silent contemplative prayer, you start to see everything as the gift that it actually is. And when you see it as a gift, you can start to receive it as the gift that it is. You see with the sense of wonder. So that void that we talked about before, the void that silence always fills, now is heavy. It's weighted with the presence of God. It's not cold and cumbersome anymore. It's heavy with the presence of God. Okay. Before we go into our groups, I just want to... I may have a bunch of contemplatives in front of me. I don't know. Maybe you don't know how to pray. I don't know. But I would like to just offer a few pointers or whatever, just that I've... And by the way, the whole reason I was able to write many of those things before is because I was those things, those prayers, the ones that, all the battle things at one point in time. Many of us are at one point in time. So how do we actually enter into silence? First, find your spot. Find a spot. You can do it in the church. But I would recommend, and the second one is find your time, recommend waking up maybe 30 minutes before you normally would for work. Fix a pot of coffee. Check your feelings. That's the next one. Say, how will my feelings affect my prayer? Because many times we think that something spiritual is going on, but it could be something totally different. There was a guy at Auburn University, and the spiritual director, he came up to the spiritual director and said, I think I'm going through the dark night of the soul. I just think this is some deep spiritual stuff. I just can't pray. I'm dry, whatever. And the spiritual director asked him, he said, well, what have you eaten in the past couple of days? He said, well, pizza. He said, well, have you eaten anything today? He said, well, no. But Father, I'm really going through this dark night. He said, maybe you might just be hungry. I don't know, You could just be human. We're body and soul. Maybe you broke up with your girlfriend the week before. That's going to affect your prayer. So self-awareness is key. So find your spot, find your time, find your feelings, and then check your body. Move slowly. The soul likes to go slow. Okay, so look at your coffee pot, pour it slowly, smell the coffee, walk into your room, light a candle, get the senses going, and just go slow. And then maybe start with what's called a mantra. So Jesus, Jesus, or a word, just silence. Anything to get you into that envelopment of silence. And then you're not thinking about images or anything like that. You're just sitting in silence with the Lord. Okay? So I recommend that for at least just the first 20 minutes of your prayer. I love rosaries, I love Our Fathers, like all that is excellent. I just think a lot of times it can be a crutch that keeps us from going further if the Lord wants to go a little bit deeper. All right, any questions about that? Okay, so I know we have Bible school going on. And all our tables are taken up. So I'll leave it up to you if you want to actually go into discussion or if you just want to ask questions, and then we can spend the rest of the time in the church praying.